What does learning look like for you on a personal level?
And so we wanted knowledge to diffuse between peers, and that's the other reason we let somebody go or fire them, and that that has an effect on their family or their life. It's a lot of power in anyone's hands. But audiobooks while strength training. So the seed habit was strength training. The second was the habit that emerged from that was audiobooks and reading a lot, or just fiction to turn my mind off of osmosis for a little while and listen to Dostoevsky or something. There's a great book called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, and one of his whole chapters is competition is for losers. I find it much more satisfying to be friends with the CEOs of all these other companies, and because careers are long, and some of them have wound up referring people to us into YouTube events, who then come up to me and say, I've used osmosis, I love it. I know having an arch rival or an enemy can help motivate you, but it's not the best form of motivation. The best form of motivation is intrinsic as opposed to an extrinsic factor, whether it's your parents telling you to get a higher grade or it's this person you're competing against. Thames River, running around it.
running
around it, not the actual river, but running.
You running around the river.
The river. I was on a plane and someone saw my hat and was like, do you use osmosis?
One message to budding health tech entrepreneurs.
Focus.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mindset series. I'm Dr. Veena, and today I'm joined with someone from across the pond, an incredible individual who is a founder of a platform that if, like me, you're a medical student or a clinician, there is no way you wouldn't have come across. I'm joined today with Shiv Gaglani, co-founder and CEO of Osmosis.org, a leading health education platform which boasts an audience of millions of current and future clinicians. He's also a regular contributor to Forbes, which named him in their 30 under 30 list in 2018. If that wasn't enough, in terms of his academics, he's done an undergraduate degree in Biomedical Engineering at Harvard. He's gone on to then complete his MBA at Harvard, and he'll tell us a bit more about his medical journey in studio. Without further ado, Shiv, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Really, really great to be here with you.
Yeah, you're one of those individuals where we don't always see the face behind platforms that we use on a day-to-day basis. So getting to sit across you, getting the opportunity to hear your story is actually a real privilege. I just want to open by saying that, actually.
Likewise, thanks. Again, it's a privilege to be able to join you guys. And I had a great time at the YouTube Health UK event where we met, just meeting people who've actually learned with osmosis across the pond, as you say.
Yeah, across the pond. Yeah, absolutely. So to start with, why don't you tell us, what has your scholastic journey been like?
Yeah, and so education's obviously very important. I'm South Asian as well, and I grew up in Africa, in Namibia. That was where I was born. My dad's a physician, my mom's a physical therapist, and my sister's a dentist. Wow. So the joke is between all the Gaglani family, they can treat anybody.
So, have your own hospital.
Exactly. They own clinics, and actually they have several clinics. So I'm the black sheep in that I went through, so I did Harvard undergrad, as you mentioned, Biomedical Engineering. I went to med school at Hopkins for 2 years, where my goal was initially to become a surgeon and to build medical devices for, brain-computer interfaces or all, neurosurgery mostly. And then along the way, I got distracted, took time off to start Osmosis, which we can get into. And I did my MBA at HBS in parallel to growing Osmosis. And now I'm actually back in med school because a year and a half ago, the large publisher Elsevier, which is best known for Grey's Anatomy and The Lancet and a few other wonderful titles in healthcare and science, acquired my company and gave me the freedom to come back and hopefully finish med school this time around.
That is incredible. I'm intrigued. What year did you leave med school to go to HBS?
So in the U.S., as you probably know, it's 4 years of med school. Okay. I did 4 years undergrad, it's 4 years med school. I did 2 years of med school before I took time off my co-founder and I did a tech incubator that took the original ideas around osmosis and helped us scale from about 120 medical students at Hopkins to 5,000 that summer.
Wow. And did it start off as a YouTube platform?
No, actually, no. It's a good question. It started off initially as just a website, very embarrassing website.
Nothing is embarrassing, but that's where it began, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Reid Hoffman, the guy who started LinkedIn, among other things, he was part of the PayPal mafia. He famously said, if you aren't embarrassed by your minimum viable product, like your alpha or beta of your product, you're shipping too slowly. And so looking back at those early screenshots and how it worked, it's pretty embarrassing. Essentially, it was just a website where students at Hopkins could crowdsource questions and quiz ourselves on very local questions, right? Because your professors in different classes, pathology or histology or OB-GYN, they ask very specific questions based on their research areas and stuff. And so we were crowdsourcing hyper-local questions for each professor at Hopkins. And that helped us pass our exams. So we were building this startup while passing our med school exams and double dipping. But then only 2 years in did we start a YouTube channel because the team that used to run Khan Academy, Health and Medicine, they used to have a health.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah, led by our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Rishi Desai, joined us. And then they brought all that experience growing a YouTube channel to Osmosis, but with a twist, which we think was the secret sauce that helped us grow, at least within healthcare, more efficiently.
That journey in itself is incredible. And I think it's going to inspire so many people to even hear that, where you didn't just have the courage to do it, but I want to say the tenacity to go about it. What was your mindset behind leaving med school to pursue this?
Yeah, obviously worked most of my academic career to get into med school. And so to then leave med school, scared my parents in the process. My co-founder and his parents weren't talking for a little while.
Weren't talking?
Just, normal arguments and stuff, and then didn't talk. I mean, you have an argument with your parents, and I had some of that as well. But fortunately, they were very supportive because we kind of had to explain how we were thinking about it, where when I make a decision, when most people make decisions, hopefully they realize that most decisions are reversible. Mm-hmm. So rather than just straight out dropping out of med school, you could at least take a year off. Yeah. Most med schools, at least in the U.S., allow you to take 1 year off. Fortunately, Hopkins didn't have a policy. So there was no I only have 1 year to see if this works or not. I actually pushed it to the limits, which was 10 years. And so I took 10 years off because I got the MBA and it takes a long time to grow a company.
This would not work in the UK, guys.
No, okay. Maybe, hopefully, as the stories get out, because I'm not the only person in at least US med schools who's left and then come back. And so we took time off, but it was a reversible decision. That's one. And number two, we actively tried doing things that would help both the company grow and help our medical careers if we decided to go back. So for example, we started publishing papers about education and about what we were building at Osmosis early on. Because as probably is the case in the UK, but definitely in the US, to get into residency or med school, having publications showing scholarly work helps. And so we were double dipping where it's like, okay, publishing these papers, including a paper in the Lancet and Annals of Internal Medicine, helped us gain credibility when it came to selling Osmosis into schools. Imperial College of London is a client of ours. NYU is a client. Kaiser Permanente, we have over 250 schools. So having the academic backing helped us sell. But also, if it all failed and we just needed to go back and finish med school, we would have a bunch of scholarly publications that would help us with residency.
Yeah, and what a great backup, isn't it? I'm just a doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually wild. With Osmosis, I remember at YouTube Health you mentioned, I think you opened with something along the lines of, we all consume knowledge or we all learn through osmosis in some way. Tell us a bit more about that.
So that's how we chose the name Osmosis, because people had already been saying, I wish I could learn by osmosis, right? And most people, when they joke and say that, they mean sleep with their head on a textbook, and the concentration gradient means that knowledge will diffuse into your mind. So actually the company name is Knowledge Diffusion, but the product is Osmosis. So we chose it because we wanted learning to be as efficient as that, where you can just be sleeping and it absorbs. Obviously, learning is a little harder than that. There's a whole concept in learning science called desirable difficulties, where you want things to be a little difficult to actually encode that. So we incorporated all these evidence-based techniques that weren't all put into one platform before. Yeah. That's what made us unique. And then the second reason we called it Osmosis is that, I'm sure you experienced this in med school too, is that a lot of your learning is done peer-to-peer. Mm. It isn't just teacher to student. It's also in study groups or crowdsourcing questions, as I mentioned, which was the beginning of Osmosis. And so we wanted knowledge to diffuse between peers, and that's the other reason we called it Osmosis.
And that continues later on even in your medical career, right? As specialists working with different specialties, it continues. It doesn't just end in med school.
I assume so, yeah. You know better than I do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because even now, especially with the COVID pandemic, each time new guidelines were coming in, all the specialties were kind of liaising with each other, talking, what are you doing in respiratory? What are you doing in OBGYN? What are we doing in primary care? Yeah. And I think that learning is lifelong and it continues.
Totally.
Yeah. With Osmosis videos, I remember using it to even understand the most simple concepts to the most complex concepts. Was there a way in how you picked topics, or was it just something that came about over the
Yeah,
years?
it definitely we evolved how we pick topics over time. So a combination of what are the most challenging things in med school, right? The things that are gotchas, like the brachial plexus or the coagulation cascade, things that as we were going through med school, we found it hard to learn. So we're like, definitely those topics. A second is what are the most searched for terms on YouTube, on Google, by hopefully med students, right? You can filter not by med student, but by like 18 to 24-year-olds. And so, I made this point at YouTube and I stand by it, which is that, you've probably heard the 80-20 rule where 20% of your efforts lead to 80% of your outcomes. And so it's actually more like 5%, 95%. We found within 5% of our videos result in 95% of our views because we've produced so many videos and we have a long tail of videos. So we're like, okay, what are the most popular search terms? And when people search for things on Osmosis and a video doesn't show up, we have a counter of like how many times it happens in a given month and then can triage. A third is just what people are writing in on. And then a fourth, we have an entire team at Osmosis called Diffusion Studios, where we partner with organizations to create videos. So for example, with 23andMe, the direct-to-consumer genetics company, we've made a whole course on direct-to-consumer genetics for health professionals. With Fresenius, we've made one on dialysis. We've partnered with the CDC in the U.S., Center for Disease Control and Prevention on COVID education. YouTube has funded us. We've made a bunch of rare disease videos with YouTube. So a lot of that's the fourth section of videos we create, which is basically collaborative and sponsored.
I'm starting to see where the 10 years have gone. I'm starting to see. Needless to say, it's an amplitude of work. Does that work energize you? Or have you ever felt overwhelmed by it?
Definitely overwhelmed. It's a roller coaster, right?
Yeah.
Starting anything, and especially a company where you have employees, you have so many stakeholders. You have employees, you have your shareholders, because we raise investment, seed and Series A from venture capitalists and angel investors. So you start getting these stakeholders, and I've definitely had sleepless nights or waking up really early and like, okay, how are we gonna make this happen? Whether it's a competitor coming in, and I've reframed how I think about competition over the years, or it's an executive who we hired and placed a lot of hopes in who didn't work out. And fortunately, I had a co-founder, and so the chances of him being down and me being down at the same time were lower, right? So that's one reason I think co-founders are helpful, is you can kind of balance each other out and help pick each other up. And then the second is just the basic self-care, which I think is relevant to physicians as well, or anyone in a high-stakes environment, which is just prioritizing your health, your fitness, your meditation, all those things to stay level and equanimous.
You say that, but do you actually practice it?
Definitely.
Okay. Yeah. So what does self-care look like to you?
So I wrote an article for Forbes in 2018 called Ditch Your New Year's Resolutions and Instead Plant Your Seed Habit.
Okay.
And the whole point was, I think every Q4, like November, December, people start having a lot of ambition around what the next year is going to look like. Yeah. And by February, they've mostly failed. Like I think 80% of New Year's resolutions are ditched by February. And that scar tissue of having set goals and failed every year sort of makes people jaded, observationally, but also there's been some studies. And so a seed habit is what I experienced, which was a turning point for both my personal life and Osmosis. These are obviously correlated because as a founder, you have a lot of impact on your company, was 2018, 2019, when I got into strength training. I'd always been like a cardio, running, marathon, like triathlons, but I had never really focused on strength training. Strength training was my seed habit, where now I would be spending 4 or 5 days a week for 1 to 2 hours max in the gym. And because I wasn't elevating my heart rate as much with strength training, it was slower paced. I did rest between sets. It gave me time to listen to audiobooks to get back in. I used to read a lot, but then physically reading after staring at a screen for 10 hours a day, I stopped reading as much. But audiobooks while strength training. So the seed habit was strength training. The second was the habit that emerged from that was audiobooks and reading a lot. So I like got really into reading, where I was reading 2 books a week on average, just 2x, med school. Like
Incredible. Yeah, 2x.
2 to 3x a lecture.
Yeah.
Similarly with books, you can 2x a lot of them. So I read a ton of books in that 1 year, and the knowledge in those books obviously helped with Osmosis, whether it was setting our culture or figuring out a new marketing strategy, or just fiction to like turn my mind off of Osmosis for a little while and like listen to like Dostoevsky or something. So that was seed habits. And then a third habit that came from that is, because I'm working out, because I'm reading, I just started eating healthier. And I went, for a couple of years, I went straight vegetarian. Now I'm pescatarian again, just to get more protein in. But because I had read autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi and some other books, I went vegetarian. So that was a third habit that came out of that. So it sort of all blossomed from there.
Wow. So you do practice what you preach.
Yeah.
And, it sounds like you really have it embedded in your lifestyle, and you found like a pattern, and a healthy one at that. What if there was somebody who really struggles to even begin? What would you say to them, where to start to kind of take care of themselves as a man working in a high-functioning environment?
I think knowing someone's motivation matters. And so I think one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for why they should prioritize their own self-care, is actually, if they're a health professional, there's a lot of research showing that the healthier you are, not only are you functioning at a higher level because you're eating healthy, you're working out, you're just thinking better, but also you're a better role model for your patients or for those around you if you're a leader of an organization. And so if you don't do it for yourself, do it for the people who depend on you. Could be your kids, could be, again, your patients. So I think having that motivation, and then I find that often it's just 1 or 2 messages or frameworks that get across to the right person at the right time. And so a book that I think is very popular that I recommend to anybody who just wants to change their habits, 2 books I'll say. One is Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's a very popular book. But the second is a guy, a Stanford behavioral psychologist named BJ Fogg, who wrote a book called Tiny Habits. Very similar to Atomic Habits, but a different academic take on it. And I would say his whole thesis is that rather than say, I'm going to run a marathon, right? It's the whole couch to 5K or couch to walking around the block. You start very small, start with a tiny habit, get those wins, and then the momentum picks up.
That's literally what I tell patients. You have to begin. I think just starting, and it's not one size fits all. It looks different for every person, but you have to begin, isn't it? Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. You have this whole platform based on learning. What does learning look like for you on a personal level?
So learning is so interesting. It's a great question. It used to be very, again, academic, test, zero-sum game, right? There's a perfect score. There's a top of the class. There's a teacher who's authoritative, right? Or a book that's authoritative. It's sort of evolved into what I wish more students learned earlier on, say in like elementary school or even before, which is it should be fun, right? Like it doesn't feel as much work. It'll be hard, like a desirable difficulty, but fun because it's gratifying. It should be applicable. Not all learning needs to be, I'm learning this so I can treat this patient. Some of it can just be, I'm just curious about something, but applicable in that you aren't just learning something, you're also able to apply it in some way. So like I do a lot of chess. Like chess is actually how I began learning in the first place, was learning different opening moves. But then once you learn something in a book, you then need to apply it and actually play the game. And so in Osmosis, we've tried incorporating these, like some of these lessons, like making things fun. So if you've watched our videos, we have cells that smile, we have sound effects. It should be fun. Yeah. Life is too serious, I think. Not
completely agree. There's too much serious stuff happening around where you have to just have a lighter note. Absolutely agree.
Totally. Yeah. So it should be fun. It should be short form, right? Because again, not everyone can spend 4 years getting a degree, but maybe someone who's very talented could spend 10 years part-time getting a degree. And so if you can have bite-sized learning opportunities that is competency-based as opposed to assessment-based, I think that's another key theme.
Yeah, because even the world today, what's exposed to us, there's so many more options. Things are not binary anymore. You don't have to be fixed in a box in one career. You can have an evolution of careers. You can have multiple careers. No, you're really right. Talking about learning in that way, making it fun, making it more digestible. Being a student, having been a student, being around a lot of students even now, anxiety, peer pressure, competition kind of really plays a big factor in students' minds, right? What's your view on that kind of anxiety leading to mental health problems in that cascade of kind of students and clinicians?
I think a lot of competition is unnecessary, not just on like peers competing for a top spot, but also between companies or between countries, between large organizations. There's a great book called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, and one of his whole chapters is competition is for losers. Naval Ravikant, who started AngelList, and it's great. And there's another really good book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. Yeah, you read that?
It's a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, his whole point is that you don't compete with anybody if, well, he has several points, but one is people play a zero-sum game, right? When we can change and maybe play an infinite game where rather than me competing against you for some random spot, we can work together and both achieve what we want, right? Absolutely. Or create more spots. That's often how I view competition. Like people often ask me, how do I view all these other companies in medical education, that some of which came after Osmosis and copied a lot of what we've done. Some of which, frankly, we weren't the first ever. Like we were competition to some other companies that were there long before us.
It was so unique. I remember being because I consumed what you created without obviously knowing you, without knowing who was behind all of this. And, we're here in the UK. I went to King's and Imperial. We consumed those videos and we knew, okay, this topic we don't understand. Let's find an Osmosis video because we know we'll understand it by the end of it. Awesome. And that says something. That's testament to the work.
Thank you. Yeah. It's definitely unique. I think the style we had, and we benefited. We were lucky that YouTube was rising as we were growing. We grew on YouTube, really. But, I find it much more satisfying to be friends with the CEOs of all these other companies, and because careers are long. And some of them have wound up referring people to us. Others I can see myself working with on other companies in the future. So I subscribe to competitions for losers. Med school, I think, brings out a lot of competition because people who get into med school tend to be the top of their secondary school. Yep. And then suddenly they're a small fish in a big pond. Yep. And it's just hard for people's egos. Absolutely. And I think if you could leave your ego at the door and instead view everyone as someone you can learn from and be friends with, I think you just have a much better time through any part of your life, especially med school.
It's easier said though, right? The grade and the mark doesn't define you, whereas, like you said, being South Asian, you go home, that mark does define you, or who speaks to you for the next few days. But I hope this is a culture that comes to shift, and I hope even in learning, everyone just helps each other, works together, because everyone just needs to get out of med school at the end. Once you're out, no one really asks what you got in this semester or what you did in that, what paper did, no one really cares. Once you're out, you're just treating patients.
Totally. And it's all about relationships, right? Like at the end of your life, you hear that the quality of someone's life is predicted by how many close, deep relationships they have. And so rather than competing and randomly with people like who could be really good friends of yours, might as well build stronger relationships with them. Like I know having like an arch rival or an enemy can help motivate you, but it's not the best form of motivation. The best form of motivation is intrinsic as opposed to an extrinsic factor, whether it's your parents telling you to get a higher grade or it's this person you're competing against pushing you to be better.
Sounds very higher and insightful. When you were saying that, all I could think of is Twitter and Threads right now. It's like, what kind of competition is healthy? And, I'm actually intrigued. Why go back to med school?
Yeah. So I actually wrote another Forbes article where I laid out 6 reasons, but a couple of the big reasons. One, the most important one is that I love what we've done at Osmosis. I love the scale we've achieved. I love the fact that there are people I haven't had the opportunity to meet who, until like YouTube events, who then come up to me and say, I've used Osmosis, I love it. And so I love that kind of impact. However, what I've been missing is the one-on-one direct impact that you can have, especially when you have a patient in front of you and there's something you can do to help them, whether it's you're actually a clinician and you can prescribe them the right thing or take out a tumor, or it's just being a med student and like just talking to them, spending the time to like listen to their story, and maybe you'll pick up on something that the busy clinician didn't pick up on. So that kind of direct impact, I think, is where at least I've gotten my best ideas for other things. Second reason I've gone back to Hopkins is that I'm very excited by AI and by psychedelics for mental health. And so both those things, among other things, brain-computer interface, again, is still really exciting to me, drive me. And I think being a student, being a full-time student again, back at Hopkins, it's a great way to like meet people doing interesting work, but also do interesting work myself. Third reason, I think it's much easier to go to med school nowadays than a decade ago. because of tools like Osmosis.
Yes.
Right. So I'm using Osmosis. I'm using other Elsevier products. So Complete
Yes.
Anatomy is a sister company of ours and Clinical Key Student. So it should be a lot easier. Plus, I don't have the stress of like, debt and do I have to do residency to pay it off? Like those things are gone. And an important reason that I'll keep sharing is, whereas back in the day, it probably was 30 to 40% of why I did it. Ego, like my identity, my parents wanting me to do it. It was high, right? If I'm being totally honest. Yeah. Now it's still there, but it's not 40%. It's maybe 5%. So I still kind of want to make my parents proud. They're proud, but that's still there. Like, and I don't like, not finishing things. And so, not saying that I will finish med school this time around because I'm
you
already
might leave for another 10 years to give us something else.
I mean, maybe. Like I know we joke about that, but it may actually happen because I'm already working on some interesting things. But I think that's part of the beauty is like zigzagging, not being too fixed on something.
I love that. And I really respect the honesty. I think it takes a lot for someone to actually own up and say that in today's day and age. So I think that's honorable,
Thank you.
to say the least. How do you balance your personal life, your personal endeavors with all of this that you're creating for the world around you?
It's a really good question. So balance is interesting. You've read Naval Ravikant's book where one of the analogies he talks about is instead of like trying to balance your life for 30, 40, 50 years, where you're working 9 to 5, but you have weekends and 1 or 2 weeks off every couple of months for vacation. The analogy I think he uses and others have used is life is more like being, for some, like a lion, right? There are periods of your life where you're on the hunt and you're like not sleeping. You're working all the time for a period of a while. And then there's other times where you're just resting, like a lion's will laze around. I think I like that because it reduces the pressure on finding the ultimate balance where I can go between different seasons of life. And if I'm building a company, I may not be balanced. I may just be, and I may not work out as well. Actually, that one I'm going to keep going because I've gone through a couple phases where I've maintained that. And then there's other times where like I'm just going to rest and like be bored, and that's when you come up with really interesting things. I think that's generally the framework I think about it now.
Yeah. Have you personally ever gone through burnout?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, COVID burned out a lot of people. And I think it was much harder for people like yourself who are actually on the wards, treating patients, people dying around you. So I don't want to overstate how much.
But it's relative to each person.
Relative to each person, yeah. The company grew. We raised funding. We're growing over 100% revenue year over year. And then COVID hit and we accelerated because every school had to go online education. So that was really good. But we were going nonstop for months and people around us, teammates, some of their family members were suffering. And it basically at the end of COVID, I think a lot of us just felt pretty burned out, but we had to keep going because we were VC backed. And ultimately the sale of the company happened in 2021. And part of the reason for the sale was feeling this burnout. We had grown this independently for so many years and felt like it would be a nice break to now be part of a much larger organization, to go from 100 people to 8,000. And it has been. The pressure's gone down. But, there's been challenges like we can't make take all the shots that we want. Yeah. Like I think if we were independent, I probably would have already had an AI chatbot in Osmosis by now, but we just move a little slower being part of a much larger organization. Yeah. So the flip side of stability is maybe slowness, I found. But I'm much happier like now having done this than I think I would have been had we not.
Yeah, Shiv, I remember coming out of COVID and people telling me, oh, I learned how to make banana bread. I've had to see my partner every day. Oh, this has been so stressful. And I'm like, when I say it's the hardest I've worked in my life, we had patients calling in who were working at cemeteries and there weren't enough space for the bodies. And it was, when I tell you some of the things we've seen, we can't unsee. Yeah. We've had family members say goodbye to their relatives on the phone because they weren't allowed to come in, women giving birth to children without anyone in the room. It was, honestly, I think most of us have some element of PTSD from that season. So when people come out and tell us things like, oh, I had to see my husband every day at home, and I'm just like, yeah, that must have been really hard.
Exactly.
That must have been really hard. But it's relative, right? And now we can somehow laugh about it. But no, I really can reflect about what you're saying. It's quite interesting. And the fact that led to that wave and dip and the decisions that you guys have come to now.
May I ask, what did you do for your burnout? And I'm just curious how you managed all that.
At the time, I don't think there was enough time to process the burnout. So I'm a trained dancer. Dance was a big part of what I did. And initially I started creating. When I'd come home, I'd choreograph something. But it got to a point where the amount of, I don't mean to sound dire, but the amount of death and suffering you saw, I physically couldn't find it in me to create when I came home. So I bought a keyboard and I learned how to play the keyboard online. That's what I did during that period. I would come home and I was like, okay, it can't be dance. It has to be some creative outlet. So for me in that period, because everything was closed and we were one of the few professions who were out on the streets or going out and about, it was just learning how to play using this app and YouTube.
Wow.
How to play it. Now I can play a few songs on the keyboard.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, turning no mud, no lotus is what they often say, or turning turning lemons into lemonade.
American phrases, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
the lemonade, the mud. You lost me at the mud, but yes. No, that's fine. No, thank you for sharing that. Because you mentioned AI a few times, technology penetrates every industry. Healthcare is no different, and we're seeing the changes at the forefront. Clinician-based, how we communicate with patients, how patients deliver their treatments, monitoring, remote care, all of it. Where do you see AI being placed? I know it's a really big question, but where do you see its initial placement in healthcare?
I think the overall consensus from a lot of individuals I respect, people like Eric Topol, who's written several books on the subject, as well as Peter Lee, who works at Microsoft, is that a lot of the tools that we're going to see, the killer applications initially are going to be documentation, reducing the burden of documentation, where ideally you and your patient can just talk like normal language. And
that would be the dream, by the way.
Right?
If you could just do this and something just writes for you.
Yes.
Instead of then having to keep doing,
Totally. Reducing hours of documentation a day, which take you away from the patient and burns you out. Plus, gives potentially a discharge summary or a patient note. Yeah. It creates something for the patients, because if a patient's getting news, you know this again better than I do, but if they're being told what to do after prostatectomy or how to prepare for a colonoscopy, it's a lot of work. I mean, for someone whose maybe average literacy level is high school or less, it's a lot to learn. And so if that was documented and sent to them and kind of automated, I think that there's a lot of positive things that will come out of that. So I think that's probably the killer use case. And then as AI gets better, as these models get better and they don't hallucinate as much, which will happen over the next couple of years, like it's compounding very quickly, then hopefully more on the diagnostic side of things. Is it scary?
It's exciting, but it is scary. I'm going to be honest, it is scary.
I'm optimistic. What are you most scared about?
I'm definitely optimistic, but I think it's more not the fear of the unknown, but also the uneasiness of the unknown, if I'm honest, just because it can ease the burden in many ways. It's very exciting. I don't think any of us are going to have our head in the sand. So I think we need to be kind of alert and acknowledge what's happening. But change at the rate that it's happening, it does make people uneasy, I have to be honest.
That's true. I think that's what's one of the differences between now versus maybe like when smartphones were coming out or the internet, is that things are much faster. Things are just happening
It's too fast. And I think as a clinician, already when patients come to see me, it's, oh, by the way, I looked on Google and read these 3 articles and this is my theory of what's happening. What do you think?
Yeah.
That's how we open a lot of consultations now with. The premise of thinking an AI bot would tell them everything, and then where would the clinician fit in? Yeah. What would our role be? I'm sure it will evolve, but it's just the thought of, would we lose that human factor of where we come in to actually personalize care for the patient?
It's a good question. My hope is it makes us better, better humans, and so better at whatever we decide to do. So like that's again maybe an overly optimistic view of it, but I think frankly, as someone who's built a medical education company, I think a lot of what we educate doctors on, or nurses or PAs, is not that important. Like, we've made videos at Osmosis where I'm like, I really hope people don't actually have to learn this stuff directly, because it's just for passing a test and having a working knowledge. But imagine how much less debt or how much less stress med students and others would have going into their profession if they didn't have to memorize everything.
Everything, yeah.
So, and then maybe that opens up the doors for people to kind of to become clinicians who otherwise would not have become clinicians. So a lot of, again, in the US, I think in the UK, it's like the best students, the ones who are best at taking tests. And is that really what makes the best clinician, or is it the person who...
I don't think so either. I agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
I think it's medicine itself. A lot of it is problem solving and pattern recognition, a lot of it. And people skills, of course, but I think a lot of it is that. And I don't think tests always depict the best. candidate for the role. Yeah.
I 100% agree. And so hopefully it gets people to be more authentic to themselves. Like what am I really good at, and what do I want to pursue because I'm good at that.
Because you just mentioned that, and a lot of students, a lot of people in any industry really go through this, imposter syndrome. Have you ever felt it, or what's your view on it?
Yeah. So fortunately, I've grown up, my mom and dad, but in particular, my mom is fearless, right? Like they're immigrants, and twice from India to Africa and then Africa to the US. So just seeing their example and or what they've told me growing up for many years is this belief that, I've seen them do anything. Really? I've seen them like achieve whatever they want, and vice versa, them tell me that I could do anything, right? So unfortunately, I know a lot of people, like especially people who worked at Osmosis, where the first thing, if you say, oh, I want to start this business, or I want to do this, the first thing maybe the loved ones will tell them is like all the reasons it could fail. Yes. Fortunately, like I got that from my mom and dad for sure, a little bit, like protect the downside, but a lot of times it was the reasons it'll work, and that plus all the reading, people like Jeff Bezos who've said. They have a regret minimization framework, which is I have to do this because when I'm 80 or 90 in my deathbed, if I didn't do it, I would have regret in my life. So fortunately, I feel like, I have that background where I'm not overconfident. Like I definitely know my limits, but I don't have as much imposter syndrome. But for people who I've worked with who've been my teammates, I've tried coaching them who have imposter syndrome. One of the best resources I've found is actually from the UK. It's the School of Life. Do you know the School of Life?
I love their videos as well. Yeah,
I love the School of Life.
I love it. It's the voiceovers. It's so relaxing, aren't they?
Yeah.
Then you're like, I want to follow what they're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, it's creative, and their books are awesome. Yeah. And they have a book on confidence. They have books on everything that I feel like if I could meet one person, Alain de Botton, who's the guy who started the School of Life, a British philosopher, one of the coolest, most interesting people I would love to meet. But they have a book on confidence that I think I've gifted to several people that actually has a really good ways to just reframe how you think about the reasons you feel like an imposter, or one would feel like an imposter. And this is one of the reasons I'm so interested in psychedelics too, is that I think the commonality between travel, between making friends, between reading or learning anything, or psychedelics is it kind of opens your mind to different perspectives. And sometimes all you need is that one different framework or perspective to then change your life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. As you were saying that, what came to my mind was CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that we often tell patients who are suffering with anxiety or depression or any kind of condition that kind of puts a pressure on your mind. And a lot of it comes to the root of identifying that first thought and reframing, because you said reframing it.
Right.
So it doesn't complete the entire cycle to lead you to the, reliving of the symptoms and kind of suffering.
Yeah.
So I think reframing has a lot of power.
100%. Yeah. And CBT, I think, is wonderful, obviously. I think for a lot of people, it takes a while to get there and to reframe it. What psychedelic research offers, whether it's Imperial College London or at Hopkins, is the ability to reframe faster. And not that you want like a gold, silver bullet, because you still have to put in the work, but it just reduces the priors that someone would have that would prevent them from even going down that pathway. Because there are a lot of thought processes that are so embedded. Yeah. Or PTSD is a good example where, like, say somebody went to war and experienced like a explosion next to them. Anytime they hear a siren or hear a loud noise, that's like a pattern that's embedded in them. And to break that pattern, CBT can help, but the psychedelic research is showing that that's a much more effective way and faster way at being able to break those patterns.
When you say psychedelics, are there any specific modes?
Yeah, so the classic psychedelics are psilocybin from mushrooms, LSD. Then there's also, in the U.S., ketamine's FDA approved. It's not a classical psychedelic. And then
because we don't necessarily prescribe any of this, and it's not here.
It's not like, yeah.
No, so would this be, so the research you're doing is more to kind of form a basis to see if this can help with those conditions and then get to a prescription level? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm not doing it personally, but in the U.S. it's been very popular. It's decriminalized in a lot of countries like Portugal and the Netherlands. A lot of it is. Imperial College London, a professor named Dr. David Nutt actually is one of the leaders too. And Robin Carhart-Harris, who was at ICL but now is at UCSF, they've done a lot of research over the past 20 years, but even before that, in the 60s and 70s, before it was banned in the 80s, showing that for example, MDMA has already been done, seen in 2 phase 3 clinical trials that are FDA approved to help reduce severe PTSD in 2/3 of patients within 2 months of therapy.
What was the cohort size of that?
It was, I'm trying to think,
Was
between the 2 studies,
Yeah.
over 100.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay, interesting.
It'll probably be FDA approved at the end of this year or next year.
How interesting, isn't it? This is the thing. These are things that you just casually saying, oh, it was banned in the 80s and now it might come back again to help cure. I think it's definitely an exciting time for learning and just keeping our minds open.
Totally.
I'm intrigued to know, Shiv, where do you go for inspiration?
Good question. I think I haven't really, I don't recall trying to seek out inspiration. I think a lot of times you just expose yourself to a large enough surface area and the inspiration finds you. So reading a lot, but also traveling, and during those travels, meeting other people. Really anything that, again, changes your perspective. Yeah. I think when you change your perspective, you get inspired. I mean, of course, once in a while I like watch an awesome movie, a sports movie like Creed or something, or Rocky. And that's a constant source of inspiration, those montages.
Nice. If you were to just think back to a very big challenge that you faced with Osmosis that really shaped who you are today, could you think of one?
Yeah, and there's so many. One that comes to mind is the first time I had to fire an executive, because I'd spent a lot of time hiring. And, there's that adage, hire slowly but fire quickly. Yep. And, for something not to work out and to actually like let somebody go or fire them, and that, that has an effect on their family or their life, it's a lot of power in anyone's hands. And so those CEOs who can lay off 50,000 or 20,000 people, it's like really impressive that they can do that. But obviously, they have to do it for the company most of the time. So that really shaped kind of how I thought about the responsibility of being a CEO. And again, another book recommendation for anyone who may listen who's in that position is Ben Horowitz wrote a book, What You Do Is Who You Are. And it's all about culture. He also wrote another book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Both are really good startup books. And that kind of made me a better leader, that process. Unfortunately, the person I did fire, I've now fired several people, but generally it's a good relationship. Yeah. Like one of the guys I had to let go is actually back working with us, and like I invested in his venture, he has a VC fund, and it's relationships last a long time. So even if you have to let somebody go, if you can maintain the relationship and not burn a bridge, I think it's a good thing.
Interesting. And it's funny when you were saying that, there's a quote that I'd read once that said, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think that really lies true as well. You're right, because if you can hold that kind of humanity and relationship, even in doing such a hard job, and if they can come back to you and trust you enough to work with you again, that means you've definitely done something right. And I think there's something to learn there. Yeah, for sure. That's amazing. And because we talked about a challenge, what is the most rewarding thing about building what you have done with Osmosis for you on a personal level? What's been the most rewarding?
Obviously so we have 2.8 million YouTube subscribers, 3.4 million registered learners, but many more people have used Osmosis videos. And now it's common enough that if I wear this hat or a shirt and I walk on like a med school campus, or not even a med school campus, like I was on a plane and someone saw my hat and was like, oh, do you use Osmosis? And he was a dental faculty member who uses Osmosis to teach dentists. So we have this thing called Osmosis in the wild. So that's always gratifying. And one of the things I enjoy most is meeting learners, not just to get I used Osmosis, I loved it, but also I don't like it because of X, Y, Z, so you can keep improving it, right? Continuous improvement, because even if it worked once, it's not going to necessarily work again in a couple of years. There's something else that comes out. So I would say that's super rewarding. And then the other thing that's highly rewarding is the people around you. Again, it all comes back to the team and the people and the relationships. So hiring people who were individual contributors, making $15 to $30 an hour, who now, fast forward 3 to 6 years, are leading teams of 20, 30, 40 people, are making 6-figure salaries, are buying houses because we had a good sale, are paying off their student debt. So I'm here because of them, but they're also here because of Osmosis.
Absolutely.
And I think that's super gratifying.
I concur. Completely hearing that, I'm inspired. I feel like going back to work, I'll be so inspired to do what I do. So thank you for all of that. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
You can relax now. We're now going to go into our fast rapid fire segment. Okay. Candid answers, not thinking too much, but I think you're so quick on your feet anyway. I don't think you're going to have trouble with this at all. Okay. This is just for everyone to just get to know the man behind the scale. Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
Your favorite video on osmosis?
ECG series.
One message to budding health tech entrepreneurs.
Focus.
Just focus.
Just focus.
Oh, that's brilliant. Favorite thing about London?
The Thames River, running around it.
running around
it, not the actual river, but running.
Oh, you running around the
Running
river.
around the
Okay, I
river,
thought the
yeah.
river running around the city. Fine, okay.
No.
And the worst thing about London?
I've heard the weather, but every time I've been here, it's like really nice and sunny.
No,
Like,
that's a
today's
rumor.
awesome.
Don't listen to anyone. The weather is amazing. Favorite tool that you use to organize your daily schedule?
Favorite tool? Just keep it simple. Google Calendar.
Yeah. Okay. If you had an alternative career?
Entomologist. Studying bugs.
What?
So
That's
random.
so specific.
It's so random. I wanted to be an entomologist from like when I was in first grade, but then actually like I actually touched like a big tarantula and I did not like that. But
How does anyone even...
it's just, you're a kid, you're playing in the dirt and there's all these bugs and it's just fascinating. Like ecosystems of like ants. Like I don't know, it sounds very nerdy.
This sounds like my nightmare, but I'm really happy for you. I hope you get there as well. Your favorite medical TV drama?
Scrubs.
Yeah, Scrubs was fun.
Just laughing.
After you finish, are you going to specialize?
I don't know.
Okay.
Good question.
If you did, are you still leaning
Probably-
towards surgery?
No. Psych neuro most likely. Yeah, something about the brain.
If you could go back to second year of med school when you had to make that decision of leaving to then build Osmosis, would you do anything differently?
No, I'm no counterfactual. I'm happy with how everything happened.
Amazing. That wasn't too bad. Well done.
Thank
Well done. Okay. So now I know you were looking at me weirdly when I was writing on these pearls. So this part is, we have these pearls. They're like called pearls of wisdom with different topics. Each of the guests pick a pearl and you give us your pearl of wisdom on that topic.
That's fascinating. That's great. I love that.
Ready? I hope you can understand.
Cool. Learning.
Wow. What are the chances?
What are the chances? Just to have fun. Again, like I think the pearl of wisdom is just the things I've learned and actually applied the most and found the most useful are the things I enjoyed, right? So just asking yourself whenever you're learning something, am I enjoying this?
And what about when times where it can't be fun, like ECGs, when it can't be fun, you have to just learn it to learn it?
Yeah, I mean, I've forgotten. I keep forgetting ECGs. And so I like the video, but I keep forgetting it because part of it's like a computer will do this better than I can and already does it better than I can. So without being able to get over that hump, whereas like bugs or chess or like building a company, these things were fun. They aren't fun all the time.
Yeah.
But like generally things should be more fun than they are not fun when you're learning something.
Interesting.
I think.
Yeah, no, and considering what you've built, I think we should listen to what he says. If you're out there to learn, make it fun.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. As we come to a close, is there anything you would like to ask me? You don't have to, but if there is.
One message I'll leave with and then ask you something is I'm very open to when people want to connect. Like I've benefited tremendously from people who've taken the time to advise me. Not mentor is a very loaded word because, can I be your mentor? Like, can I be your mentee? It's a lot to ask, but just like a couple questions or maybe eventually it's a longer term relationship. If people want to contact me and they have questions about anything, they can just find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Shiv Gaglani. Apparently not on Instagram. Apparently there's a fake.
There is a fake.
on Instagram. But LinkedIn or email me at shiv@osmosis.org.
Yeah, we'll leave it all below here. Yeah.
And then one question for you is just, you've done a lot of these awesome interviews. Like what has been one of the most interesting insights or framework changes that you've picked up from your podcast that maybe you've applied actually in the last several months?
Well, I've actually learned that every individual is so unique. I know we all know this already, but when you listen to their trajectory and their stories and how they overcame challenges and what motivates and drives them, it's honestly encouraged me to become better at doing what I'm doing, to try get the best stories out of people. And I think that for me is really rewarding, getting the best story and understanding what really drives their mindset.
Yeah.
I find it really rewarding.
Well, you're really good at it. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. And obviously, the setup you have is incredible. I'm taking notes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shiv. Thank you so much. Guys, as he said, I'll leave all his contacts below. Feel free to write either to him directly or to us. And if you have any feedback, any comments, anything about learning, any interest about psychedelics or bugs, let us know. Thank you so much for tuning in, Shiv. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yay. Is that okay?